What issues did you have with Hollow Knight? I mentioned that I didn't love Hollow Knight the first time I played it, and I think there are quite a few issues with the game. I think the biggest disappointment for me were the boss fights. I think most of the boss fights are not really that memorable. Besides a few like Hornet, the Mantis Lords, or, well, the Hollow Knight, most of the bosses are just not that interesting, and some of them end up being too annoying. Yes, I'm looking at you, Watcher Knights. In silksong I think a lot of the bosses are actually pretty interesting. I find a good chunk of them actually fun to play, of course with the exception of a few of them. I also find Hollowness to be a lot emptier than Farloom. Of course, canon-wise that makes sense, but I think you just spend too much time just walking around aimlessly. And because Hollow Knight is that empty, it doesn't feel like you're actually doing anything. When I got lost in silksong, it didn't feel as bad because the world felt more alive. But probably the biggest issue in Hollow Knight is the knight itself. Now I love the knight as a character and from a lore perspective, but on gameplay this guy stinks. Especially when comparing them to Hornet. The knight sometimes feels clunky and floaty, and actually unplayable without certain charms. Like Quick Slash and Marker Pipe, I genuinely cannot play the game without these. But the worst part of the knight is the healing system, because the healing system of Hollow Knight is so bad. You have to stand on the floor holding down a heal button and wait a few seconds to heal one mask. But if you let go a bit too soon, you don't get the mask and you lose soul. And there are charms that help with this, that's true, but they're just not worth to use it over the other ones. And because the healing conditions are so specific, it's really hard to find healing windows in boss fights. Silksong does this a lot better. Not only is Hornet a character that is more fun to play, her mechanics are more engaging and the healing system is a lot better. Because 1, you can heal in the air, and 2, you heal the 3 masks at once. It does take longer to be able to heal, but that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. And while I do think silksong is a much better game than Hollow Knight, that's not to say that it does everything better than Hollow Knight. The early game balance in silksong is terrible. You start with basically nothing, and the enemies are so annoying and so strong. Also, Hollow Knight doesn't have wild water. That's always the plus in any video game. With all this said, I like both games. They both have flaws and issues, but they're still pretty good games. When I came back to Hollow Knight after playing silksong, I enjoyed it a lot more, probably because I got better. Also, Primal Aspid. That's an issue.